The wind carried a bitter chill that evening, sweeping across the high plains and whistling through the cracks of the old ranch house. The day had died in a smear of orange and purple, and now the sky hung low and gray, the color of cold iron. Inside, a lantern flickered on the wooden table, its flame bending under the draft. The rancher sat alone, shoulders slumped, staring into his half-empty tin cup. He'd long stopped counting the nights he'd eaten by himself, the silence stretching wider than the land outside. Out here, loneliness wasn't a feeling. It was a way of life. He had grown used to the creak of the boards, the distant howl of coyotes, and the slow groan of the windmill turning in the distance. Nothing much ever changed on the edge of Dry Creek Valley, a forgotten corner of the frontier where time seemed to drag its boots. The nearest town, Ash Hollow, was a half-day's ride through barren prairie and dust, a place that looked friendly from a distance but carried shadows deep in its heart. Folks there smiled when they had to, but their eyes always told another story. He didn't go to town often, not anymore. The last time he did, he'd seen something that had stayed with him ever since. A preacher's wagon rolling down the main road, bells ringing and people whispering like bees around honey. Someone had been accused of something, no one said what, but the way they looked at the wagon, fear mixed with guilt, told him enough. He didn't ask questions. In towns like Ash Hollow, it was better not to. That night, as he sat by the dim light of the lamp, the wind shifted suddenly, sharp and restless. The horses out in the corral began to stir. One gave a startled whinny. He froze, cup halfway to his lips, and listened. There it was again, a faint sound, too soft to be the wind. It was coming from outside, near the barn. He reached for the rifle propped against the wall and stepped onto the porch, boots scraping the rough boards. The moon was pale and thin, barely enough to see by. The ranch spread out before him, empty and still, except for the faint flutter of something near the fence line. He squinted into the dark. Then he heard it again, a voice weak and shaking. "Help. Now. Or I'm dead!" The words cut through the night like a knife. He lowered the rifle slightly, heart pounding. The sound came again, desperate, broken. He moved toward it, each step careful, the cold biting through his coat. As he rounded the corner of the barn, his lantern light caught the edge of something. A torn dress, mud-soaked and trembling. A woman was crouched by the fence, clutching one arm close to her chest. Her face was hidden beneath tangled hair, and her breathing came in ragged bursts. He set the rifle aside and knelt a few feet away. "Easy now," he said quietly. "You hurt bad?" She flinched at his voice, backing up like a frightened animal. Don't let them see me," she whispered. "Please, they'll come back." "Who?" he asked, keeping his tone calm. She shook her head, eyes darting toward the empty fields. "They'll find me if I talk." He looked around. The land stretched empty for miles, no torchlight, no sound but the wind. "Ain't no one out here but us," he said. "You're safe for now," she didn't answer. He could see she was shivering, her hands covered in dried blood and dirt. Whatever had happened, it wasn't just a fall. He offered his coat, and after a moment she let him drape it around her shoulders. When she finally looked up, he saw the terror still swimming in her eyes, something deep and wordless that sent a shiver through him. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded weakly, and he helped her toward the porch. The wooden steps creaked under their weight as they stepped inside. The lantern light cast their shadows long and thin against the walls. She sank onto the chair near the fire, her hands shaking so bad she could hardly hold the cup of water he gave her. "Name's not important," she said when he tried to ask. "Don't tell anyone I'm here." "I wasn't planning to," he said. "But you need a doctor." Her eyes flashed up at him, sharp and sudden. "No doctor, no sheriff, no one from Ash Hollow. Promise me." Something in her tone made him pause. He'd heard plenty of fear before, fear of debt, of drought, of hunger. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that came from knowing something you wished you didn't. He nodded slowly. "All right. No one." For a long while, neither of them spoke. The fire popped softly, and the wind moaned against the windows. Finally, she whispered, "They killed him." The rancher's brow furrowed. "Who?" "My brother," she said, voice trembling. "They said he stole something from the church. But he didn't. I saw what they did to him. I ran. I thought I could make it to the next town, but they followed me." He felt the weight of her words settle in the room. He'd heard whispers about the preacher in Ash Hollow, how things went missing and how folks who questioned it disappeared. Still, most people turned their heads. It wasn't their business. Out here, survival depended on silence. "You're saying the preacher's men did this?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, eyes glistening in the firelight. You don't understand, she said. It's not just him. The whole town's in it. They think they're doing God's work. The rancher leaned back, his jaw tightening. He'd seen enough hypocrisy in his time, but something in her words stirred old anger. You can stay here tonight, he said after a moment. I'll keep watch. She nodded, exhausted, and soon her head drooped forward, sleep overtaking her. He sat by the window, rifle across his knees, staring into the night. The wind had quieted, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still out there, watching. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Just as he started to doze, a faint sound reached him. A horse's snort, the jingle of a bridle. He stood quickly, moving to the window. Out beyond the fence line, he saw it. 3 riders, dark figures against the moonlight, moving slow and deliberate. They stopped near the edge of his property, scanning the land. One of them dismounted, crouching to the ground. His chest tightened. They were tracking her. He moved quietly to the table and blew out the lantern. The cabin fell into darkness. Behind him, the woman stirred, her voice barely a whisper. They've found me, haven't they? He didn't answer. Outside, the riders spread out, their silhouettes shifting through the tall grass. He checked the rifle and set his jaw. Stay quiet, he told her. No matter what happens. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the windmill and the low murmur of voices outside. Then came a sharp whistle, a signal. The rancher took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the years pressing on him. He'd spent so long trying to stay out of other people's troubles, but tonight, trouble had found him anyway. As the first shadow moved toward the barn, he stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, the cold night pressing close around him. Somewhere behind him, the woman whispered a prayer, her voice trembling, and then came the sound that froze his blood, the unmistakable click of a hammer being drawn back, somewhere in the dark. He didn't know yet whose secret he'd stumbled into, or how deep it ran through the town of Ash Hollow, but as the wind carried a faint echo of laughter from the fields, one thing became certain: whatever was hiding out there wasn't done with them yet. The silence that followed was heavier than before, the kind that warned of something worse still coming, and in that moment, he knew. His quiet life on the plains had just ended, and the real story had only begun. The night dragged on, long and uneasy. The rancher stayed by the door, his rifle steady but his heartbeat uneven. The faint rustle of dry grass outside told him the riders were still there, circling slow, waiting for a reason to move. He'd lived through prairie storms, droughts, and winters that could freeze a man solid. But this was different. This kind of stillness felt alive, like the land itself was holding its breath. He turned his head slightly toward the woman, who was sitting by the dying fire. The light flickered across her face. She looked pale, worn thin by fear and exhaustion. Every time the wind shifted, she flinched, her eyes darting toward the window. He could tell she wasn't used to trust anymore. "Those men," he said in a low voice. "They from town?" She hesitated. "2 of them are," she whispered. "The one in the long coat, he's with the preacher. The other 2 do whatever he says. They've been following me for 2 days. He nodded slowly, piecing it together. "You must have seen something worth chasing." "I wish I hadn't," she said, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. "My brother used to keep the books for the church. He told me once that the preacher wasn't honest, that money went missing, and men who asked about it stopped showing up to Sunday service. I didn't believe him then," her voice cracked, "but I saw what they did when he tried to speak up. They dragged him into the barn behind the chapel. No one stopped them. They all watched." The rancher's jaw tightened. "And no one in Ash Hollow said a word?" "They pretend nothing happened," she said. "That's how that town survives, by forgetting what they don't want to see." He leaned back, staring into the dark window. The faint glow of lanterns flickered in the distance now, 3 moving dots weaving through the grass. They hadn't given up. He'd seen that kind of persistence before, back during the border skirmishes years ago. Once a man decides someone's not supposed to live, he doesn't turn back easy. The woman looked at him then, her eyes filled with quiet pleading. "If they find me here, they'll kill you too." He gave a short nod. "Maybe, but they'll have to try hard." She studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe that. Then she said softly, "You don't even know my name." "Don't need to," he said. "Names don't change what's right." The fire cracked, the wood collapsing into embers. He stood and moved toward the window again. The lanterns had stopped moving. The riders were still out there, waiting, watching. He could almost feel their eyes on the house. He thought of Ash Hollow. The way it looked on Sunday mornings, the sound of the bell, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, children running across the dusty street. You'd never know something rotten lay underneath. Folks there had always been polite but guarded with him. He figured it was because he kept to himself, but now he wondered if it was because they all shared a secret they didn't want outsiders to see. He turned back to the woman. "You said your brother kept the books. You still have them?" Her expression tightened. She hesitated before reaching into her torn satchel. From it, she pulled a small leather-bound journal, edges burned and pages bent. "This is all that's left," she said. "They were looking for it when I ran." He took it carefully, setting it on the table. The ink was smudged, but he could still make out names, town officials, amounts of money, and something else scratched in hurried handwriting. The meeting beneath the well house. He frowned. "You know what that means?" She shook her head. "I never got the chance to ask. My brother said he'd show me proof, but the night before he could. They came for him." The rancher stared at the note for a long time, the firelight glinting off the page. The well house, he remembered it. It stood behind the church, old and boarded up, said to have gone dry years ago. Kids dared each other to go near it, saying strange sounds came from beneath. He'd laughed it off once, but now the thought of it made his skin crawl. A loud thump outside made them both freeze. The horses snorted nervously. He grabbed his rifle again and motioned for her to stay low. Peering through the crack between the boards, he saw a figure near the barn door, just standing there, still as stone. Then, just as quick, it vanished into the dark. He waited, muscles tight, breath shallow. The wind picked up again, rattling the loose shutters. Then a voice, soft, mocking, drifted through the night. "Evenin', rancher. Heard you been taking in strangers." He didn't answer. The voice belonged to someone he recognized, Eli Darnell, one of the men from the Ash Hollow saloon. A hired gun and the preacher's favorite enforcer. "You know what they say about helping the wrong kind of folks," Eli continued, his tone smooth but cold. "Brings trouble on a man's doorstep." The rancher's grip tightened on the rifle. "You best turn around, Eli. Ain't no one here for you." A low chuckle came from the dark. "That's so? Funny thing, I got tracks leading right up to your fence." "A woman's tracks." Silence hung heavy between them. Then Eli said, "Preacher just wants what's his. Hand her over, and we'll be gone before sunrise." The rancher felt the woman's eyes on his back. He didn't turn to look at her. "You tell your preacher he don't give orders out here," he said finally. "Now get off my land." For a long moment there was no reply. Then came a faint whistle, the same signal as before, and the sound of hooves fading slowly into the distance. He lowered the rifle, exhaling hard. "They'll be back," he muttered. The woman's voice trembled. "They never stop," he nodded, staring into the embers. "Then we make sure they regret comin'." She looked at him, a strange mix of gratitude and worry in her eyes. "You don't understand how deep this goes," she said quietly. "Ash Hollow isn't just a town anymore. It's owned, every store, every acre, by the church and its men. They decide who eats, who works, who lives. Nobody crosses them and stays breathing long." He thought about that for a while, letting her words sink in. It made sense now. The fear, the silence, the way people looked over their shoulders in town. It wasn't just superstition keeping folks quiet. It was control. Before dawn, he saddled a horse and rode to the ridge, leaving her hidden in the house with his old revolver. The plains stretched before him, endless and gray. From up there he could see Ash Hollow in the distance, the faint smoke rising from chimneys, the church steeple cutting into the pale sky. Even from miles away, the bell tower looked wrong to him, like a finger pointing accusation at the world. He didn't ride all the way to town, just close enough to watch. The streets were empty at that hour, except for a single wagon parked by the well house. Two men stood near it talking in low voices. One wore a long coat that flapped in the wind, the preacher's man. He stayed there, still as stone, watching until they were gone. Then he turned back toward home, his mind turning over what he'd seen. By the time he got back, the sun was barely breaking over the hills. The woman was waiting by the door, clutching the journal tight. "I thought they'd found you," she said, voice small. "Not yet," he said. "But they're watching that old well house. Whatever's under there, that's where the truth sits." She looked down at the book. "My brother said if anyone ever read those names out loud, it'd tear the town apart." He nodded, glancing toward the horizon. "Then maybe that's exactly what needs happening." But before he could say more, the horse outside whinnied sharply. A dust cloud rose on the road, heading straight for the ranch. He stepped forward, squinting into the morning light. 3 riders again, same as before, but this time they weren't hiding. They were coming fast. The woman gripped the edge of the table, her voice shaking. "They know." He checked the rifle, loaded another shell, and moved toward the window. "Then we'll meet 'em honest." As the riders drew closer, he could see the gleam of a silver cross hanging from one man's neck. They weren't just hunting now. They were making a statement. The rancher's pulse quickened. Dust swirled, hooves thundered, and the quiet life he'd once known fell away for good. He didn't know yet how far the preacher's reach stretched, or what waited beneath that cursed well house. But he knew one thing for certain. Ash Hollow had secrets buried deep, and before this was done, they'd all come clawing to the surface. And as the first echoing shot cracked through the dawn, the wind carried the sound far across the plains, like the beginning of something that couldn't be stopped. The first shot shattered the quiet morning, echoing off the hills like thunder. The rancher ducked low by the window, glass breaking above his head as a bullet splintered through the frame. The woman gasped and crouched behind the stove, clutching the journal tight against her chest. Smoke rose from the rifle barrel of one of the riders outside, the sunlight glinting off his hat brim. The others were spreading out, trying to box the house in. He took a breath, steadying his nerves. He'd seen gunfire before, years ago, but he'd never thought he'd live through it again. Out here, men settled disputes with hard words or long silences, rarely with bullets. But this wasn't a normal dispute. This was a warning from Ash Hollow. He returned fire, one shot aimed low to scare the lead rider's horse. It reared, throwing its rider to the dirt. The other 2 slowed, reassessing. For a few seconds, there was stillness again, just the sound of wind and creaking boards. The woman looked at him, eyes wide. "You can't fight them all." He didn't answer right away. "Maybe not," he said finally. "But I can make 'em think twice." He slipped out the back door, circling wide toward the barn. The dry grass crunched under his boots. When he peeked around the corner, he saw one of the riders crouched near a fence post, signaling toward the others. He recognized that coat, long, dark, with a patch on the sleeve. "Eli Darnell again. Thought I told you to stay off my land," the rancher called out. Eli turned, smirking. "You should have listened to reason, friend. Ain't too late to hand her over." The rancher leveled his rifle. "Don't think so." Eli's smirk faded. For a moment their eyes locked, the quiet kind of standoff that told both men this wasn't ending with words. But before either could shoot, a new sound broke the tension, the faint cry of a whistle from down the ridge. Eli froze, listening. Then his face changed. "They're coming," he muttered almost to himself. He turned to his men. "Mount up!" The other riders hesitated. "What about the girl?" one asked. Eli swung into his saddle, glaring back at the house. "She ain't going far. We'll be back when the town's ready." And just like that, they were gone, riding off in a cloud of dust toward the valley road. The rancher lowered his gun, frowning. That whistle hadn't come from his land. Someone else was out there. When he returned to the house, the woman was standing by the window, still gripping the journal. "Why'd they leave?" she asked. "Don't know," he said, scanning the horizon. But something spooked him. He poured water from the basin and wiped the sweat and dust from his face. "They'll come again, maybe with more men next time." She nodded faintly. "They always do." The rest of the day passed slow and uneasy. The rancher fixed the broken window, fed the horses, and tried to keep busy. The woman stayed inside, her eyes often drifting toward the horizon. Every sound, the creak of the windmill, the cry of a hawk, made her flinch. Near sunset, he saddled up and told her he was riding to the North Ridge. "I need to see who else is out here," he said. She didn't argue, only said, "Be careful. They've got eyes everywhere." The land stretched quiet as he rode north. The plains glowed gold under the dying light, and the wind carried the smell of dry sage. He reached the ridge as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields. From there he could see Ash Hollow again, tiny and still. But he also spotted something else. A lone figure on horseback, waiting by the edge of the trail that led into town. He approached slowly, keeping his rifle within reach. The rider turned as he neared, a man in a worn deputy's badge, his face lined and tired. "Evenin', rancher," the man said, tipping his hat. "Didn't expect to see you this far out." The rancher studied him. "Didn't expect the law to be this far either." The deputy gave a dry laugh. "Law's just a word in Ash Hollow these days. I do what the preacher lets me." The rancher's grip tightened on the reins. "That why you're out here?" The deputy's gaze dropped to the ground. "I heard there was trouble at your place. Men reading hard from town. I came to warn you," he frowned. "Why help me?" The deputy looked out toward the plains. He used to believe in what that town stood for. Hard work, decency, faith. But now it's turned into something else. Folks disappear, records vanish, and no one says a word. You're not the first they've hunted, and you won't be the last. The rancher studied him. "You know what's under that well house?" The deputy hesitated, jaw tight. "You don't want to." "I think I do." After a long pause, the deputy said quietly, "It's where they keep what they've taken." "Not just money, people too. Anyone who questions the preacher ends up down there, and the town pretends they moved on." A chill ran through him. "And you?" "I tried to speak once," the deputy said, eyes dim. "Next day, my brother's barn burned to the ground. I've been keeping quiet ever since." The rancher looked out toward the valley. The first stars were showing, pale and cold. "They're not going to stop, are they?" The deputy shook his head. "No, but I can help you if you help me. There's proof in that well house, records, maybe bodies. If we can get to it, we can show what's really been happening." The rancher thought of the woman back at his place clutching her brother's journal. "There's someone who already knows," he said. "She's got names, numbers." The deputy's eyes widened slightly. "Then you better keep her safe. If the preacher finds out, he'll burn your ranch to the ground before sunrise." The rancher turned his horse. "Then we better move before he does." He rode back fast, dust rising in the fading light. The air had turned cool, and the sound of crickets filled the distance. When he reached the house, the lamp was out. He called her name softly, but there was no answer. The door creaked open. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the embers in the hearth. The chair where she'd been sitting was empty. The journal lay open on the floor. His pulse quickened. He stepped inside, scanning the room. Then he saw it, a single footprint in the ash near the door, larger than hers. Someone had been there. He moved outside, rifle ready. The corral was empty. Her horse was gone, but near the fence, he found something else. A small piece of cloth caught on the wire, torn from her dress. It trailed off toward the direction of town. He cursed under his breath, anger and fear mixing in his chest. They'd come while he was gone. He didn't waste time. He packed the journal into his saddlebag and rode out into the night. The moon was high, the prairie silver and still. He followed the faint marks of hooves through the dry grass, his mind racing. If they'd taken her back to Ash Hollow, she'd be lucky to see another dawn. By the time he reached the edge of town, it was near midnight. The streets were quiet, shadows spilling from shuttered windows. Only the church bell tower glowed faintly under the moon. He tied his horse near the blacksmith's and moved quietly down the back alleys, every sense sharp. From behind the church, faint voices carried on the wind. He crept closer until he could see the old well house. Lanterns flickered around it. A few men were standing guard, their faces half hidden under their hats. And in the middle of them, he saw her. Her hands were bound, but she stood tall, her eyes defiant. The preacher was there too, a tall man with gray hair and a heavy gold cross. His voice was calm but carried power. "You think you can expose what you don't understand," he was saying. "But this town lives because of what we do. You should be thanking us, not running from us." She didn't reply. The rancher crouched low behind a fence post, every nerve burning. The deputy's words echoed in his head, proof in the well house. Whatever was hidden down there, it had kept this whole town under control. One of the guards lifted the wooden cover from the well, the hinges groaning. A cold wind rose from the darkness below, and the rancher felt something deep in his gut twist. He tightened his grip on the rifle, heart pounding. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and one wrong move would end it quick. But he couldn't ride away, not now, not after everything he'd seen. The preacher raised his lantern, peering down into the well, then turned toward her. "It's fitting," he said softly, "that you join your brother at last." Before she could speak, a sudden sound split the air. A horse's neigh, close and sharp. All heads turned. The rancher seized the moment, stepping from the shadows, rifle aimed steady. "Let her go," he said. The preacher's eyes narrowed, his calm cracking for the first time. "You don't know what you're doing, son." "Oh, I think I do," the rancher said. "I've seen what this town's become." Tension thickened in the air. The guards reached for their weapons. The woman's eyes met his, wide, desperate, but still full of fight. The preacher lifted his hand slowly, signaling the men to hold. "You can't save her," he said, his voice low. "This town belongs to me, The rancher's finger hovered over the trigger, breath tight. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from the darkness behind the church, another figure stepped forward. The deputy. His badge caught the light and his revolver gleamed. "Maybe not anymore," he said. The preacher's expression darkened. The guards turned, unsure who to aim at. And in that frozen second before the world exploded again into chaos, the rancher knew this wasn't just about saving one woman anymore. It was about dragging the truth of Ash Hollow into the light, no matter what came with it. The wind rose, carrying dust and the faint toll of the church bell. Then everything went still, just before the next gunshot split the night. The gunshot ripped through the night like thunder. For a moment, no one knew who had fired first. The horses outside neighed and pulled at their reins. Shadows shifted and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. The rancher ducked behind a wagon, the rifle firm against his shoulder. A bullet struck the side, splintering the wood inches from his head. He fired back once, the echo bouncing off the church walls. Smoke rolled through the air, curling in the lantern light. The preacher stood still amid the chaos, calm and unmoving, his eyes locked on the rancher. Around him, his men scrambled for cover, shouting orders and curses. The deputy had taken position behind the stone well, firing short bursts to keep them from circling around. The woman was still bound, ducking behind a barrel as bullets hissed past her. "Keep your head down," the rancher shouted toward her, then turned to the deputy. "They'll pin us in if we don't move." The deputy nodded grimly. "We need to draw them away from the well house." The rancher knew what that meant. The proof, whatever it was still inside. They couldn't let the preacher's men seal it again, but getting there meant crossing open ground under fire. The preacher finally raised his voice, cold and commanding. "You think you're fighting for justice, but you're standing in God's way. Lay down your weapons and you'll be spared." The rancher's answer came sharp and hard. "You don't speak for God, you speak for yourself." Another shot cracked out. A lantern shattered, and flames licked up the side of a wooden post. The preacher's men began pulling back toward the church doors, trying to surround the two of them from both sides. The deputy shouted over the gunfire. "There's a side path behind the stables. If we move now, we can reach the well." The rancher fired one last shot to cover their retreat, then sprinted across the dirt, the deputy close behind. The heat from the growing flames brushed their backs as they slid behind the old well house. The preacher's voice echoed again, closer this time. "You can't hide forever. This town was built on obedience, not defiance." Inside the small shed, the air was damp and heavy. The stone floor was cracked, and an iron grate covered the mouth of the old well. The woman stumbled inside a moment later, breathless but alive, the ropes around her wrists frayed where she'd managed to loosen them. "Are you hurt?" the rancher asked quickly. She shook her head. "I'm fine. But they'll find us soon." The deputy knelt by the grate, shining his small lantern down into the darkness. "There's something down there," he said. "Wooden crates, looks like. Maybe more." The woman's eyes widened. "That's what they were hiding. My brother said they used the well for storage, to keep what they stole out of sight." The rancher crouched beside them, peering down. The light barely reached the bottom, but he could make out faint outlines. Boxes, maybe papers. And something else, a shape that made his stomach twist. The deputy looked up. "Bodies," the word hung heavy in the air. They all froze as footsteps echoed outside. Voices closer now, more than before. The preacher wasn't alone anymore. Others had joined him. "Townsfolk, maybe. They'll burn us out if they have to," the deputy said. "We need proof in hand, not rumors." The rancher nodded and gripped the edge of the grate. Together, he and the deputy pried it open with a rusty iron bar. The hinges squealed, echoing down the hollow shaft. "Quick," the deputy said, tying a rope to a support beam. "I'll go first." He slid down, boots scraping the rough stones until he reached the bottom. His lantern swung back and forth, lighting the walls. "There's letters," he called softly. "Books, records, everything." The rancher helped the woman down next, her hands shaking as she descended. He followed last, landing on the cold dirt floor. The air smelled of rot and damp paper. Wooden boxes were stacked along the walls, each marked with the church's seal. He knelt beside one, prying it open. Inside were envelopes stuffed with cash, jewelry, and ledgers. "They took everything," the woman said quietly, her voice trembling. "Donations, savings, even people's land." The deputy nodded grimly. "It's proof enough to bring the whole town down." But before they could grab anything, the sound of boots echoed above them, then the slam of the well house door. "They've sealed it," the rancher muttered. "We're trapped." The preacher's voice carried faintly through the grate, calm and steady. You shouldn't have come here, son. You could have had peace, but now you've chosen sin over salvation. The woman backed against the wall, fear flickering across her face. He's going to bury us here. The deputy clenched his jaw. Not if we find another way out. Old wells like this sometimes had drainage tunnels. Look along the back. The rancher moved the lantern, scanning the walls. There, partially hidden behind a pile of crates, was a narrow opening, half collapsed but still passable. This might lead out, he said, but it's a crawl. Better than waiting to die, the deputy said. They started clearing the crates when the first wisp of smoke began to drift down from above. The woman coughed, covering her mouth. They've lit it, she said, voice cracking. Flames. The preacher was burning the well house. The deputy cursed under his breath. Go, get into that tunnel. The woman hesitated, looking back at the boxes. We need the ledgers, proof, no time, the rancher barked. Move! She grabbed one journal, the smallest, and crawled into the tunnel. The deputy followed close behind, lantern in hand. The rancher came last, covering the rear as the smoke thickened behind them. The tunnel was narrow, the air choking with dust and ash. Every inch felt longer than the last, the ground shaking faintly as the fire roared above. They crawled for what felt like miles before the air began to clear. The passage opened into a shallow ravine, hidden behind the churchyard. The night air rushed in cool and sharp. They stumbled out, coughing and gasping for breath. The woman clutched the journal tight. They'll think we're dead. Let's keep it that way, the deputy said. The rancher looked back toward the town. The church steeple was glowing orange now, flames licking high into the night sky. People were running through the streets, shouting, but whether they were trying to save the church or themselves, he couldn't tell. They'll blame someone, the woman said quietly. Probably you, he nodded. They can try. They moved toward the outer fields, staying low. The night was alive with chaos, bells ringing, voices shouting orders. Somewhere out there, the preacher was still alive. He could feel it. When they reached the ridge above the town, they stopped to catch their breath. The deputy tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and tied it around a cut on his arm. You got that journal? She nodded, holding it up. It's all here. Names, dates, amounts. It's enough to expose them. The rancher looked down at Ash Hollow, its streets flickering with light and smoke. Then we'll make sure everyone sees it. The deputy gave a slow nod. There's a telegraph office by the rail line 2 towns over. If we can reach it, we can send word. But the preacher won't let us leave that easy. He's got men on every road. The rancher tightened his jaw. Then we'll take the one he doesn't expect. They rode through the darkness, keeping off the main trails, the cold wind cutting at their faces. Every sound in the distance, every owl, every rustle, felt like a warning. The woman rode close behind, the journal tucked safely inside her coat. By dawn, they reached the old canyon road, a narrow, winding path through the rocks. From here, they could see the river cutting through the valley below. But as the first light touched the horizon, the deputy slowed his horse. There, he said quietly. Riders, 3 of them, blocking the trail ahead, and among them, the unmistakable figure of the preacher, calm and composed even now, his coat untouched by the dust of the ride. The rancher felt his stomach drop. He's faster than I thought. The preacher raised his hand. You've taken what doesn't belong to you, he said, his voice steady. Give it back and maybe I'll let you walk away. The woman's horse shifted nervously. She clutched the journal tighter. He's lying, she whispered. The deputy's hand hovered near his holster. We can't go through them. The preacher tilted his head slightly, studying the rancher. You could have lived a quiet life. You could have stayed on your land and died an old man, but you chose to interfere. Tell me, was she worth it? The rancher said nothing. Don't test me, boy, the preacher said softly. I've buried better men than you for less. The rancher glanced at the deputy. You take her. Ride for the river. The deputy hesitated. What about you? I'll hold 'em off. The woman shook her head fiercely. No, you can't. But it was too late. The preacher's hand dropped. His men drew their guns, the air crackling with tension. The rancher swung off his horse, rifle ready, boots crunching on the gravel. The sun rose over the canyon rim, painting the rocks blood red. The moment hung still, stretched tight as wire. The preacher's voice carried once more, quiet but full of fire. This is where your story ends, rancher. The rancher took one slow step forward, eyes locked on the preacher's. Maybe, but it won't end the way you think. Then came the sound, soft, metallic, Final. The pull of a trigger. The world seemed to hold its breath as the first shot of the final showdown rang out across the canyon. The first shot echoed through the canyon, bouncing off the stone walls like rolling thunder. Dust flew up from the dry ground as the rancher dove behind a boulder, his rifle clutched tight. Another shot followed, then another. The preacher's men were good, trained, steady, but they weren't used to someone who fought to the very end. The deputy and the woman urged their horses toward the river, the sound of hooves fading behind the gunfire. The rancher knew they had to make it. If she got the journal to safety, everything they had suffered would mean something. He fired back, the recoil kicking against his shoulder. One of the preacher's men fell from his saddle, rolling into the dust. The preacher himself didn't flinch. He rode slowly forward, calm as a man out for a morning ride, his eyes fixed on the rancher. "You can't stop the truth from burning," he called out. The rancher steadied his aim, sweat running down his neck. "No," he said quietly, "but I can stop you from burying it." They fired almost at the same time. The preacher's bullet scraped the rancher's shoulder, spinning him half around. His own shot struck true, shattering the rifle in the preacher's hands and throwing him from his horse. Silence followed, broken only by the wind whistling through the canyon. The rancher stood slowly, pain biting through his arm. The preacher lay on the ground, clutching his side but still alive, his hat lying a few feet away. For the first time, his calm was gone, replaced by something else. Fear. "You think they'll believe you?" the preacher said, voice strained. "They followed me for 20 years. They'll never turn." The rancher looked down at him. "Then I'll show them what you've done. I'll show them the truth." The preacher's lips curled into a weak smile. "The truth doesn't matter out here, only the story people choose to believe." The rancher didn't answer. He turned away and whistled for his horse. When he looked back again, the preacher had stopped moving, his eyes still open but empty. The wind carried away the last bit of dust between them. He didn't look back again. By the time he reached the riverbank, the sun was high, the light reflecting off the water in soft ripples. The deputy was waiting there, his shirt torn, his face smudged with dirt. The woman sat beside him, the journal clutched in her hands. She looked up when she saw the rancher, relief washing over her face. "You made it," she said, her voice trembling. He nodded, sliding from the saddle. "It's over." The deputy glanced at the wound on his shoulder. "You sure about that?" The rancher gave a faint smile. "As sure as I can be." They rested there by the river for a long while, letting the silence sink in. The air smelled of whetstone and ash. In the distance, faint trails of smoke still rose from the town, curling into the sky. "What'll happen to Ash Hollow now?" the woman asked quietly. The rancher stared across the water. "It'll have to find itself again. Without him." She nodded, tracing her fingers over the leather cover of the journal. "My brother tried to warn folks before they got to him. Maybe now, maybe they'll listen." "They will," the deputy said firmly. "When they see what's in there." He stood and reached for his canteen, offering it to the rancher. "We can take it to the sheriff in Dry Creek. It's 2 days' ride. They've got a circuit judge there who ain't bought and paid for." The rancher drank, then handed it back. "We'll ride at dawn." That night they built a small fire near the water's edge. The flames were low and quiet, enough to keep the chill away. The woman dozed lightly beside the coals while the deputy cleaned his revolver. The rancher sat apart, staring into the dark horizon where the canyon faded into the plains. He thought about the preacher's last words, about how truth was only as strong as the people who carried it. He had never wanted to be anyone's savior. All he'd wanted was a quiet life, some peace, maybe a bit of kindness in a hard world. But peace was something a man had to earn out here, and sometimes the cost was more than land or money. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of an owl from somewhere up the river. He leaned back and watched the stars appear, one by one, scattered across the deep blue like dust on glass. By morning, they were ready to move again. The woman had wrapped his shoulder with a strip of cloth, and though it still ached, he could ride. The deputy led the way, keeping the journal tucked inside his saddlebag. They followed the river east until the land opened into rolling plains and distant hills. For 2 days, they saw no one, just old wagon trails, dry grass, and the long shadow of their own past behind them. When they finally reached Dry Creek, the town looked like any other. Quiet, a few stores, a telegraph office, a hotel with fading paint. The sheriff was an older man with tired eyes but an honest face. He listened as the woman told her story, setting the journal on his desk. When she was done, he sat back slowly, silent for a long time. "I always heard rumors," he said finally. "Didn't think it was this deep," the deputy nodded. "It's all there. Ledgers, receipts, even letters from the preacher himself. You send that east and it'll reach the papers." The sheriff opened the journal and glanced through the pages. "People won't want to believe it," he said quietly. "But they'll have to." The woman's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow this time, but something close to relief. "That's all I ever wanted, for him to stop hurting people." The sheriff nodded slowly. "You've done more than that, miss. You've set things right. By sunset, it was done. The telegraph wires buzzed with news heading out across the counties, and by morning, men from the territorial marshal's office would be on their way to Ash Hollow." That night, they stayed in the small hotel by the edge of town. The woman sat by the window, watching the street lamps flicker. The deputy had turned in early, exhausted. The rancher joined her, his arm still in a sling. "It's strange," she said softly, "to see the world still turning after everything." "It always does," he said. "Doesn't mean it forgets." She looked at him for a long moment. "What will you do now?" He shrugged lightly. "Go home, I guess. Fix the fence. Maybe try planting again. You think you'll ever have peace?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe not all at once, but a little here and there." She nodded, then looked back out at the quiet street. "You gave me my life back. I won't forget that." "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Just live it." The next morning, the town was already stirring when they saddled their horses. The deputy stayed behind to give a statement to the marshal's men, but the rancher rode out early, following the road west. The woman walked beside him until they reached the split in the trail. "This is where I go north," she said. "There's folks in Helena who'll take me in." He nodded. "You'll be safe there." She hesitated, then smiled softly. "Take care of yourself, rancher." He tipped his hat. "You too." They parted there, the road stretching out between them like a line drawn in dust. He watched until she disappeared into the hills, then turned his horse toward the open plains. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and rain. The sky was wide and endless, the kind of sky that made a man feel small but alive. His ranch was still a few days' ride, but he didn't mind. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he knew where he was going. When he reached the ridge above his land, the sun was setting. The fences were still broken, the barn roof sagging, but it was his. He dismounted slowly, breathing in the familiar scent of earth and hay. The silence was deep but not lonely this time. He walked to the porch, sat down on the steps, and looked out across the fields. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying whispers of all that had passed. Somewhere far off, he thought he could hear the faint sound of the river still running. The world hadn't changed much, not really. But he had, and sometimes that was enough. The rancher leaned back against the post, watching the last light fade. Tomorrow he'd start again, repair the fences, patch the roof, maybe even plant that new seed he'd been saving. The land had a way of healing, just like people did, slow, quiet, and steady. The truth had come out. The preacher's hold was broken, and in the wide silence of the plains, peace, real peace, finally began to settle. As the stars rose one by one over the empty horizon, the rancher whispered softly into the night, "It's over." And for the first time in years, it truly was.